A dark Balkan night. The house smells of smoke and milk, a dog barks occasionally, a mother rocks her baby by the stove. It seems as if the world has stopped. And then, the clatter of hooves, the clang of iron, shouts in a foreign language. Ottoman soldiers surround the village, torches cutting fear and chaos out of the darkness. The mother hugs her son, trying to hide him under the stove. She had heard legends about the blood tax, but prayed that it would pass her house by. The door is broken down. The smoke stings her eyes. A soldier drags the boy by the leg. The boy screams, his mother rushes forward, and is struck in the chest with a rifle butt. The chronicles say that in the 15th and 16th centuries, the punishment for resistance was ruthless. Entire villages were burned, men were killed, women were sent into slavery, and children were taken away anyway. In the eyes of the Ottoman Empire, this was not considered a crime, it was the law. Now imagine not one village, but dozens and hundreds throughout Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Albania. Every year, new raids. The Ottoman records only recorded numbers. So many boys taken, so many rejected. No names. As if they were not talking about children, but about inventory. Every Christian boy risked becoming a target simply because he was born in subjugated lands. And who could protect him? No one. This is how the system known as devshirme began. A tax not in gold or grain. A tax in one's own children. The village square. Just yesterday, there was a fair here, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread. Today, only tears and fear. Ottoman soldiers lined people up in a row. Children stand next to their parents, clutching their hands, while mothers tried to shield them with their bodies. This was the devshirme, the tax of blood. Every few years, the Sultan's collectors came to Christian villages. They had one demand: to give up boys between the ages of 8 and adolescence. If a family had several sons, every fifth one was taken. Resistance was futile. Disobedience was punished with fire and sword. The picture is as follows: soldiers walk along the row. One bends over a boy, looks into his mouth, checks his teeth, as if at a horse fair. Another is forced to lift his shirt to assess the strength of his body. Another is pushed away. Too small. And the mother, who had just been begging for a miracle, now weeps with relief. Her child has been put off. Until later. For others, it is a death sentence. They leave the village forever. No letters, no news, no hope. Officials recorded the children in special books: name, age, height, eye color. Cold statistics decided the fate of thousands. Historians estimate that in the 15th and 16th centuries, tens of thousands of boys were torn from their families. Names disappeared, leaving only lines in the registers. Stop for a second. How did it look to a mother who yesterday was baking bread for her family, and today has to give up her own child? Is there a greater crime than when the law turns a son into someone else's property? Dawn. A long column of children leaves the village. Yesterday they were running barefoot on the grass, and today they are tied with ropes, under the supervision of armed soldiers. Ahead of them are hundreds of kilometers to Istanbul. The children were driven on foot. No carts, no mercy. They are between 8 and 14 years old. Step by step, over rocks and mud. The rope cuts into their wrists, their legs are covered with wounds. A 9-year-old boy falls, they beat him to his feet. Another falls behind, and is left on the road. The chronicles say that the weak and sick were simply left behind on the road. They were unfit for service and never made it to the capital. Try to put yourself in the shoes of those who kept going, walking past the bodies of their comrades, knowing that tomorrow your place could be next to them. There is a detail that makes your heart grow cold. In some villages, mothers secretly threw their children a piece of bread or a jug of water as the column passed by. For this, they were beaten with whips, and their children were punished in public. It was a warning: even a mother's love cannot save you. Stop for a moment, and imagine the scene from the outside, a procession of little captives stretching through towns and villages. For some it was the glory of the Sultan. For others, the funeral of childhood. And the worst thing was that the children themselves knew that this road led only in one direction. They would never hear their mothers' voices again. Istanbul. A huge capital city where the children's lives began anew. But the first step was to cut off the past. First of all, their names. The boy who was Ivan now became Mehmet. Dimitris was given the name Ali. Christian names were erased from their lives like footprints in the dust. Next came faith. Conversion to Islam was compulsory. The little boy whispered the Lord's Prayer, while the guard forced him to repeat the Shahada. For every attempt to remember the God of his parents, he was punished publicly so that others would not dare to do the same. Language was another loss. Their native tongue was forbidden. At first, they responded brokenly in Ottoman Turkish, and later they completely forgot the words they once used to call their mothers. Historians say it was a deliberate policy to erase a person and rewrite them. There is one more detail. Children were even separated according to their origin. Greeks were sent to one school, Serbs to another. This was done deliberately to break the sense of community and prevent unity. It was not just a recruitment of soldiers, but a carefully thought-out social engineering project. Try to imagine yourself in the place of a 9-year-old boy. He still remembers the smell of his native home, his mother's voice, the wooden cross around his neck. But he is ordered to forget everything. How long can you hold on to memories when you are surrounded by a new name, a new language, and a new God? A huge barracks courtyard. Dozens of boys, yesterday still simple peasant children, stand in neat rows. The sun is scorching, their backs are wet with sweat, their legs are trembling. There is nowhere to retreat. These were the Janissary barracks, a veritable factory of soldiers. Children were broken and remolded into a single mold. Morning wake-up, grueling drills, exercises to the point of complete exhaustion. The slightest offense was punished. Contemporaries recalled sticks, humiliation, and public beatings, all with one goal, to make discipline stronger than the fear of death. Try to see it through the eyes of a 12-year-old boy. After several hours of marching, he falls to the ground. His friend reaches out his hand, but immediately hears a blow. Both understand compassion is forbidden here. Even friendship was considered a weakness. Drill was only part of the system. The most talented children were sent to palace schools. There they studied language, calligraphy, military strategy, and the art of governance. They grew up to be not only warriors, but also viziers, diplomats, and administrators. It was like a conveyor belt that produced an entire elite, from foot soldiers to ministers. Historians emphasize that the boys lived in complete isolation for years. They did not see their relatives, did not hear the language of their childhood, and had no connection to the world outside the barracks. And when they became adults, they could no longer imagine that they were once the sons of peasants or shepherds. A boy who once cried in his mother's arms stood in line 10 years later with a sword in his hand and swore allegiance to the Sultan. This was no surprise or coincidence. It was the result of a systematic, coldly calculated re-engineering of the human being. At night, when everyone else was asleep, the boy clutched a small wooden cross in his palm, which he had miraculously managed to keep. It was the only thing that reminded him of home. But his mentors kept an eye on even the smallest details. And one evening, they found the cross. The next day, it was gone, as if his past had been completely erased. Imagine a young man who, after years of training, goes to the Istanbul bazaar. All around him are the cries of vendors and the smell of spices and roasted meat. Suddenly, he notices a woman from his home village. Perhaps even his own mother. His heart leaps out of his chest, but he walks past, not daring to turn around. Why? Because that is what he has been ordered to do. Janissaries lived by strict rules. In the early centuries, they were forbidden to marry, have children, or own property. They were to be in order without families. All love and devotion was allowed only to one person, the Sultan. Contact with relatives was strictly limited. Imagine the pain of seeing someone from your past and not even having the right to speak to them. Is there a more cruel way to tear a person from their roots? There is another detail. After a Janissary's death, all his property automatically passed to the Sultan's treasury. He could not even leave anything to his heirs. No wife, no children, no heirs. Only emptiness after a life devoted to the army. The boys were torn from their families, their past erased, and now their future was taken away. They existed only here and only now, as tools in the hands of the empire. A large courtyard in the heart of Istanbul. Rows of young men who have undergone years of training. Before them stands the Sultan in golden robes, his sword gleaming in the light of the torches. The moment they have been waiting for has arrived, the oath. The Janissaries swore allegiance to the Sultan with their lives. It was a point of no return. From now on, he was their father, and they were his children. Their real parents had long since been taken away from them. The ceremony was ritualistic in nature. The young men took part in a communal meal, a symbolic, brotherly supper. Its motifs came from the Bektashi order, with which the Corps was closely associated. It emphasized the main point: from now on, you are one, and your only master is the Sultan. Imagine a young man raising a glass and swallowing bitter wine. In his mind, the image of his real father still flashes, his mother's cry on the night he was taken away. But he doesn't dare even blink. Now every movement and every glance belongs to someone else. It was more than military discipline. It was complete enslavement of the soul. The oath lasted a lifetime. And even those who simply refused to obey orders were already considered traitors. There was only one punishment: death. The Balkan mountains. Smoke from fires, women's screams, the clang of swords. The Janissaries march ahead of the army, in shining armor, with spears and muskets. They are the Sultan's elite, his strongest strike force. Now imagine, among the villages they are burning, there may be their own homes. This is no exaggeration. Ottoman sources described cases where the Janissaries fought against the very lands from which they had once been taken. A scene from inside: a fully equipped adult warrior enters a burning house. Inside, a woman's scream can be heard. Suddenly, he recognizes the voice, his mother's voice. But an order is an order. He leaves, and the fire consumes the house. Often, they did not even know that they were fighting against their own relatives. The past had been erased to such an extent that family members became strangers. But sometimes there were terrible recognitions. What pain can compare to that of your army burning down the house where you were born? There is another important detail. In the 17th century, the devshirme system began to weaken. The Corps was replenished not only with the blood tax, but also with children from Muslim families. This eroded discipline and marked the beginning of the decline. It is a paradox of history that those who were torn from their parents now fought side by side with the sons of those who had once kidnapped them. The empire presented the Janissaries as a symbol of greatness. But behind this glamour lay the tragedy of children forced to fight against their own blood. Night in Istanbul. Narrow streets lit by torches. The rumble of thousands of footsteps. These are not enemies outside the walls or rebels from the provinces. These are the Janissaries. Soldiers who were once raised to be loyal to the Sultan now decide the fate of the empire themselves. Over time, their numbers grew so much that the Corps became a state within a state. They overthrew viziers, put pressure on the court, and dictated laws. And sometimes they even deprived the sultans themselves of power. And here's the thing: any army that's been around for too long and gets too much power stops being just an army. It becomes politics. For the Janissaries, this meant more than just battles. They realized they could decide the fate of viziers and even the sultans themselves. The most telling example is May 1622. The young Sultan Osman II decides to reform the army and limit the power of the Janissaries. He dreamed of a new army, free from their influence. But those who once swore allegiance rose up in rebellion. A scene from the capital: the young Sultan is dragged through narrow streets. His own guards, his own sons, beat and humiliate him. In prison, they strangle him with their own hands. Osman II, heir to the empire, was killed by those he himself considered the pillars of the throne. Isn't that a terrible paradox? Children were torn from their parents, their memories erased, and forced to swear allegiance to the Sultan. And a generation later, they raised their hands against the Sultan himself. The history of the Janissaries proves that even the most terrifying machine eventually spirals out of control. 19th century Istanbul. The Janissaries were no longer the brilliant warriors that Europe feared. They had turned into a caste that demanded privileges, rebelled against reforms, and held the empire hostage. The sultans feared them but had to tolerate them. Until one ruler said enough. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II carried out what went down in history as the happy event. The name sounded ironic, because it was only happy for him. For the Janissaries, it was the end. Imagine barracks in the heart of the capital. Thousands of Janissaries gathered to protest against the reforms. They demanded a return to the old order. Suddenly, the Sultan's troops surrounded the building. There were no negotiations, instead, cannons roared. Cannon shattered the walls, and fire engulfed the wooden floors. Chronicles say that a few thousand died on the spot that day. Others were executed or exiled. The order that had kept the empire in fear for centuries disappeared in a few hours. It was destroyed with the same cruelty with which the Janissaries themselves had once torn children from their parents' arms. The system, built on blood and fear, ultimately consumed itself. The village after the raid. Silence. No children's laughter, no voices of boys. Only mothers standing near devastated houses, staring into the distance. They know their sons are gone. Devshirme. Tax and blood? A word that became a sentence for thousands of families. A system that wiped out entire generations and left behind not only fear, but also the nameless graves of those who never returned home. Yes, the Janissaries became the elite, the terror of Europe, a force that overthrew sultans. But let's not forget, each of them was once a child stolen in the night. Each had a mother who cried out his name and a father who stood by helplessly. There is a parallel that makes us shudder. The history of Devshirme is not unique. Systems that rob children of their childhood still exist today. In some countries, they are turned into soldiers, in others, into cheap labor. And always under the same guise. It is necessary for the state, it is necessary for the authorities. Stop and think. When we marvel at the greatness of empires or the victories of armies, there is always a child standing somewhere in the shadows whose life has become tax. The true price of an empire is measured not in gold, but in the blood of those who never had a choice.